follow that up with another. If we say Jesus shares his life with us, I'll give you another chance here. What do you think? Does Jesus share his life completely with you, or does he maybe save a little bit on the side for a rainy day just for himself?
Oh, he shares his life completely.
You sure about that?
Absolutely positive.
Good man. What about you? Complete sharing, or does Jesus hold something back?
Seems like it's complete.
Okay. Is there enough of Jesus to go around and he can share himself with everybody?
Sure.
Good. The sharing is complete. Jesus shares who he is with us. And when he does that, do we get to do something like this? Jesus, man, your teaching is so wise. I want to share that wisdom. And the compassion you have for all of those who come to you in need, I want to share that. And the way you heal people, Lord, I'm sick, I need to share that. But you know that bit about the cross, and following you with the cross, could you give that to this guy? Do we get to do that? We try to, but we shouldn't, right? This is important. If we say Jesus shares himself with us, one of the first things that requires of us is to ask the question of, am I really willing to share fully in who Jesus is? To receive Jesus who shares himself completely, I have to be willing to receive him as he comes to me, as who he really is. And that means Jesus, the one who is compassionate, the one who is gentle, the one who is patient, and Jesus, the one who wants to share his cross with me too. That's pretty tricky. But let's linger with this sharing, this full sharing of Jesus. We just said, though, I don't get to tell Jesus. Why don't you leave that at home and I'll get back to you on that? You know, that would be like going to Holy Communion in church and Father's standing there and people are coming forward from the bench and Father lifts up the consecrated host and says, the body of Christ. And the person looks at him and says, not that one, Father, I want another one. It would make no sense, right? It would make no sense, but let's just face it, our hearts do that sometimes. You know, that's as silly as our heart can be. When we stop and think of it that way, we recognize the craziness. But just naturally, the way we shy away from the Lord, the heart does that. So St. Louis de Montfort said, let's tease this out a little further. If Jesus shares himself with us, does he share who he is with us? You know, for example, in baptism, because Jesus shares his life with you, does that mean you're a son of God too? Good. We're sons of God not just because God made us. We're sons of God because Jesus shares who he is with us. Do you know any Jesus at all who's not the Son of God? Good, because if you did, you had the wrong guy. But Jesus, who's Son of God and shares who he is with us. So if I have Jesus' life, I'm a son of God too, by adoption. He's somebody else's son, isn't he? Mary. Do you know any Jesus who's not the son of Mary? If you do, you got the wrong guy. Isn't that interesting? If Jesus shares who he is with me, Jesus is Son of God and Son of Mary. There's no Jesus who's Son of God who's not Son of Mary, is there? There's no Jesus who's Son of Mary who's not Son of God. This is what St. Louis de Montfort discovered. Jesus shares who he is with me. And that means I too, by adoption, am Son of God and Son of Mary. This is why the secret to grace has Isn't that remarkable? You know, and here we have this beautiful answer to one of the most common questions Catholics face. What's the deal with all this Mary stuff? Why Mary? And Father de Montfort's answer is really simple. The answer is Jesus. It's not that Mary gives us Jesus. Jesus gives us Mary. If Jesus gives me who he is, a sharing in his life, he's given me a relationship with Mary. Isn't that remarkable? Every now and then when you read St. Louis de Montfort in his book, True Devotion to the Blessed Virgin, he has these remarkably blunt ways of expressing himself, where he's not looking to win friends and influence people. And you read him the first time, you say, is he allowed to say that? And in one of those passages, he says very bluntly, anyone who styles himself a son of God, but claims he has nothing to do with Mary, is a liar, and his father is the devil. Wow. Obviously, he wasn't interested at that moment in winning or having a pleasant discussion with his Protestant brothers and sisters. He was making a point for Catholics who were reading his book. Understand, if you know who you are as a one who has been baptized into the life of Jesus Christ, whether you ask for it or not, whether you want it or not, or whether you know it or not, you have a relationship with Mary. You don't get to pick and choose it. It's given to you. Because he's giving himself to you, and we don't get to tell Jesus, leave that at home. A relationship with Mary is part of who you are. Even those who don't know Our Lady very well, to the extent that they have the life of Jesus within them, they too are sons of Mary. They may not know it, but it doesn't change the fundamental truth. If you share the life of Jesus, you are a son of Mary. And this being the case, St. Louis de Montfort realized the secret then to living as a child of God, the secret to growing in the life of Jesus, involves my turning to Our Lady, because the only way I can do that is by moving in and according to the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And the more I become truly her son, the more the life of the Son of Mary, Jesus, must be expressing itself within me. This is the secret he discovered. That for all of those who feel called to growth and holiness, devotion to Mary is essential. And let's just pause on that for a moment, because it's important to be really clear. Can you be a good Catholic and not have devotion to Mary?
Yes.
No, you can't. It's absolutely impossible to be a good Catholic and not have devotion to Mary. But now let me back up and explain what that means, because it's important that we understand that, okay? December 8th is the feast of the Catholic quiz. Immaculate Conception. What are we supposed to do on that day?
Go to church.
Good. If you don't go to church on the holy day of obligation, are you a good Catholic? No. Not without a compelling reason that allows you to miss the liturgy, right? Intrinsic to the life of the church is a certain devotion to Mary that every Catholic is accountable to. Okay? Why? Because the church has a devotion to Mary and we need to participate in it. On that level, every Catholic must have a devotion to Mary. We mark her feast days with the church. We learn what the church has to teach about her, and we assent in faith to what the church teaches us, right? We respect the honor that the church gives her. And We join our voices in the prayers and the songs of praise on the occasions when the church does so as well, right? That's devotion to Mary. Okay? To be a Catholic, it comes with a package. Every Catholic must have at least that level of devotion to Mary. And so in that sense, devotion to Mary is absolutely an intrinsic part of Christian life, of Catholic life. It's inescapable. In fact, even fundamentalist Protestants, one of the things they insist on, and they'll take a bullet for repeatedly, is the virgin birth of the Lord. Isn't that interesting? It's one of the anchors of fundamentalism. Even there, there's this sense that something about Our Lady is involved in an authentic living of Christian faith. And so you see, this is not, well, St. Louis of Montfort isn't asking first about tacking on anything that isn't intrinsic to what it is to be a Catholic in the first place. Because the real secret to growing in Christian life is to begin from the most solid foundation possible, which is with the authentic and the essential. And upon the authentic and the essential, that's where we begin to build. And then he's going to say what becomes optional for Catholics are any levels of devotion to Mary that we begin putting on top of that. Okay? But we all have to have a common baseline. And within that, above that common baseline, then come the practices of praying the rosary, of wearing the scapular, of the various May crownings and other traditional forms of devotion that we see. And then there is that particular way of turning to Our Lady with an eye to growing spiritually. And this is what St. Louis de Montfort would say is the truest of all devotions to Our Lady. It's a way of allowing the life of Jesus Christ to express itself and assert itself in our hearts and to claim us and to mold us into the full, mature likeness of Jesus. You guys following me so far? More or less? Okay. It's in this understanding that this notion of consecration that Father had mentioned earlier comes up in the writings of St. Louis de Montfort. And what he means is this. Jesus Christ gives himself to us completely, doesn't he? If we understand who Jesus is, and what Jesus does for us, we are saved by his total self-gift, aren't we? Effectively, Jesus turns to us. Even before he becomes flesh, he says, I will save you, O my people, by becoming all yours. All that I have will be yours. That's the decision the Lord makes in saving us. In becoming man, what does he do? He lays aside his glory, takes up the mantle of our weakness, our tragedy, our failure, our pain, all onto him. We're saved by the dumbest trade in the history of the universe. You think about that? Jesus lays aside his glory. Jesus lays aside his power. Becomes, the God who stretched out the universe like a bolt of tent maker's cloth, becomes a baby who can barely move his fingers. The Word that brings all things into being becomes a child that has to learn how to speak. The Almighty is incapable of walking. The Lord who upholds all things in his power becomes dependent on a woman. I don't know about you guys, but I would have a hard time doing that. Now, isn't that amazing? This humble, self-emptying diminishment on the part of the Lord. He gives all of that Us. By any sensible economic calculation, it makes no sense. But by the calculus of love, it makes perfect sense. And the ferocity of the love of God is so great that he will do this. The Lord radically gives himself completely to us, for us. Effectively, he consecrates himself to us. That's what the word means. The total setting aside of oneself for the glory of God. Jesus becomes man to save us, and in doing so gives his Father perfect glory and wins our salvation, where he saves us by belonging to us. But how does he do it? The Lord can do it any way he wants to, right? He's God. And there's more than one way to save a universe, especially if you're God. But what we do know is this: any way that God chooses, by definition, must be the best way, the most loving way, and the most perfect way. Or it wouldn't be his way, right? If there was a better way, God would do it. And so, curiously, the way that God chooses to save us involves a woman named Mary. Jesus gives himself completely to us for our salvation, but only by becoming man through Mary. There is no gift of the Lord to you without Mary that doesn't come through her. Isn't that interesting? And so this woman, Mary, is in a sense the royal highway that the King of all glory takes in coming to us. And St. Louis de Montfort says, if I want to meet the King, well, I could take the long way around and I could probably get lost. Or I could put my feet on the same road that he takes in coming to me, and I'll meet him on the way. Which way is more direct? The second way, right? Which way gives the King more honor? By recognizing that he chose the right road in the first place. Will the other way get me there eventually? Maybe. But it's a lot longer, it's a lot harder, and when I get there, I'm going to be a lot more exhausted. But when I take the right way, the road that the King himself takes to me, I first honor the wisdom of the King in his choice of road. Secondly, I meet him more directly. I meet him face to face, not from the side. And I meet him as he comes to me. And so our movements add. I move to Jesus even as he's moving to me. We meet more quickly. The road has a name, and her name is Mary. When did Mary belong to you? Do you know? How long Mary's belonged to you? Since before the crucifixion. Since before the Annunciation. Not quite. Close. Close. Very close.
Eve.
Well, Genesis 3:15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. The gospel before the gospels in the eye of the church. So yes, from the fall. And God's promise, as soon as God promised salvation, Mary belonged to you. And it happened in this way. When Jesus Christ decided to save us, and he looked forward and he saw in the distance the cross, and he said, I will bear it, I will die there, and I will save them by giving my life. He made another choice at that moment. He chose another. Her name is Mary. And that he might enter the world fully, he preserved that mother free from the stain of original sin by the grace of the victory that he would win. We call that the Immaculate Conception, don't we? Let's pause for a moment here, because there's a great mystery at foot. In choosing to give Mary this great privilege of preserving her free from original sin, we often think that this privilege separates Our Lady from us, don't we? It makes her different.
Yeah.
Nothing connects Mary more closely to you than her Immaculate Conception. Because the only reason she is the Immaculate Conception is that you need Jesus. Otherwise, there's no need for this special gift, is there? If God decided we're not worth saving, there's no need for the Immaculate Conception, is there? If we never fell in the first place, we all have it. Right? The only reason Mary is who she is because we need Jesus. Everything about who she is has a relationship to Jesus and to you. That's really remarkable, isn't it? There's nothing that makes Mary who she is that doesn't have a relationship to you, because there's nothing about Mary that isn't related to your salvation. In being fully related to Jesus, Our Lady is fully related to, fully given to you before she's even born. Jesus, who consecrates himself completely to us, I am all yours, O my people. All that I have is yours, through Mary, my most holy mother. He can turn to his mother and say, and you are all there is too, through your belonging to me. This is why Mary is so important. When we speak about consecration, we have to recognize that before anything we do, there exist two great acts of consecration. One is the consecration of the Lord himself, to glorify his Father in saving us. And then there is the consecration of Our Lady, her complete dedication to the work of our salvation and the life of her Son. Jesus belongs to us, and Mary belongs to us. They give themselves to us before we ever do a thing. So St. Louis de Montfort, looking at that, now he can do the math. He says, the only way I can really fully receive so great a gift as this is to try to fully open my life to it, to fully belong to it, to fully give myself over to the Lord. This is what he means by an act of consecration. A radical act of self-gift and belonging to the Lord, which is precisely a response to the great self-gift that Jesus himself first gives. The only way to receive the gift of Jesus' life is to open my life and let it claim me, right? That's what St. Louis de Montfort means by a consecration. And when he speaks about it this way, he understands that this is not the kind of thing one does in a moment of enthusiasm. This is not the kind of thing that one just sits down, says a prayer, and bang, I'm consecrated. Because opening up a life is a lot harder than that, isn't it? And reorienting a life is a lot harder than that, isn't it? And I want to be really careful here, because there are a lot of people who talk about consecrations to Our Lady and consecrations to our Lord, and there are various kinds. Okay? The consecration I have just spoken about is of a particularly powerful kind, which isn't for just anybody on any given day. Okay? And why? It's about what happens with your life. And that's to be taken seriously because your life is to be taken seriously. There are smaller forms of consecration that are simple devotional prayers that are said as first steps towards something like this. Okay? But what St. Louis de Montfort is talking about is not the gesture of a moment or a prayer that's said. He's talking about something that really asserts itself in a life, where each day and every day I work to try to open myself completely to the Lord. And for him, that becomes important. It's in this act of surrender that one discovers the true freedom to live one's faith with real power, real vigor, and real energy. And he says to get ourselves ready to do this, and the very essence of it, it's really simple. It only consists of two fundamental movements. Isn't it good to have really simple rules like that? Just do two things and you're good. Of course, they're easier said than done. Number one, we need to empty ourselves of the false spirit of the world, which is opposed to the spirit of the gospel. Good luck. But the neat thing about St. Louis de Montfort is he's always honest. And he basically says, let's look at ourselves. We got all kinds of spirits living in us. On any given day, the Spirit of Jesus is there. And there's usually about a dozen or so other spirits that are in me too. There's my pride, my ambition, my laziness, my indifference, my procrastination. There's all those old resentments I've been carrying around, all the bitterness, the things I've never forgiven somebody for, my refusal to apologize. That's all in me too. There's a spirit that makes excuses, the spirit that looks for a reason to start a fight. These spirits live inside of me too. Then there's that frightened spirit, which is always preoccupied about what somebody else is going to think. That nervous spirit, which shies away from making mistakes and so gets paralyzed. That's in me too. So he says, in order to really be filled with the Spirit of Jesus, the first thing we need to do is recognize our hearts are already full, and in great measure, by a spirit that's not the spirit of the gospel. And so he says, to prepare for something like this, we need to begin recognizing and working against the false spirit of the world. So that, step 2, we can be filled with the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And he proposes a process. He says, take some time fighting against the spirit of the world, and then take several weeks to look at learning how to be filled with the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And in his book, True Devotion Was a Virgin, one of the ways he proposes it is, take 33 days. And there's a reason for the number. Catholic tradition says Jesus lived how long?
33 years.
33 years. You see the connection? Symbolic. It symbolizes full participation in the full life of Jesus. So St. Louis de Montfort says, take 12 days at first, and use those to empty yourself of the spirit of the world. Think about that a second. If any of you guys can empty yourself of the spirit of the world in 12 days, get up here and give the rest of the talk, and I'm going to sit down and listen to you. And we laugh when I say that, but it's important, it's important that we recognize that. St. Louis de Montfort has no idea that we're going to successfully empty ourselves of the spirit of the world in only 12 days, unless there's a remarkable intervention of divine grace that happens, okay? You never rule that out, but you can't count on that. For most of us, 12 days is not going to be sufficient. It's sufficient to make a beginning. This is the essence of St. Louis de Montfort's spirituality when he talks about consecration. Consecration is a first step. It's a launching pad for our lives. But to get ready to make it, we have to learn what's involved. And so the first thing one does is sets time aside to learn. And think about this. How many of you guys have had this experience? You decided, you really want to refocus on your prayer and your spiritual life, and you begin trying to set time aside, and isn't it amazing that nothing happens until you sit down and you're going to open your Bible or pray your rosary or just take a few quiet minutes? Then the phone rings, the doorbell rings, the pager goes off, the kids start yelling, "Dad!" Your wife didn't need anything fixed until you had to take a break. It happens, doesn't it? Part of that is the way the world intrudes upon us as soon as we try and take time away from it. Because the world is jealous. Sometimes we say, I want to take time to grow in my spiritual life, but I have no time. And that becomes a problem for us too. We become frustrated. There's no time to do anything. If you remember nothing else that I say tonight, remember this. Whoever or whatever owns your time owns you. We belong to whatever owns our time. Whoever owns your time owns your life. Because we live in time, don't we? Without our time, we have no life. Not on this side of eternity. And so if we're running into the issue of I have no time for my spiritual life, that's saying something about everything else that's going on us at that moment. And so when St. Louis de Montfort's proposing setting 33 days aside, he says, the temptation is, I want to do this. Let me just do it now. He says, no. Take a month. A month of focused preparation. Why? There's no giving of life that doesn't involve the giving of time. There's no opening of life that doesn't involve the opening of time. See, even when couples come to me sometimes for counseling, one of the issues is either the husband or the wife says, there's no time anymore for me. Because to set time aside is a real sacrifice. And so in this time, these 12 days of renouncing the spirit of the world, a lot of the work that happens, a lot of the spiritual fruits happen in the struggle to claim and set aside good time for the Lord. And we realize how hard it is to find it. We realize how easily our mind wanders because we don't know what to do with a few still moments. And a lot of times what happens is over those first 12 days, people have an experience of, my God, I don't know how to pray anymore. I'm not sure what to do with myself. I'm not feeling anything. This makes no sense. I'm just distracted. It's just a fight. That's exactly what St. Louis de Montfort wants to happen. You're doing it right if that happens. Okay? If it goes smoothly, thank God for the grace that you've received, but typically it doesn't. But surfacing that difficulty in the first 12 days is essential for St. Louis de Montfort. He's very wise. Because after those 12 days, we're going to sit there and say, I didn't realize how angry I was. I didn't realize how busy I was. Or, for many of us, you get a half hour just to yourself, and isn't it amazing how quickly you want to nod off and take a nap? I didn't realize how tired I was. All of those things that we've just said have reconnected us with our life in some way. Maybe a frustrating way, but it's shown us something about ourselves, right? St. Louis de Montfort says, the steps now involved in turning to the Lord to be filled by His Spirit are 3. Know yourself, know Mary, and know Jesus. The order is important. The order is brilliant, in fact. The more I've studied St. Louis de Montfort, the more I've just been impressed with the sequence he came up with. Because right out of surfacing, I didn't realize how distracted I am. He says, now let's take a look at ourselves, at who we really are. And he says, take a week, recognizing that knowing yourself is a grace and a gift from God. We're not interested in what we think we know about ourselves. We want to let the Lord in prayer show us who we are. Because this too is one of the lies of the world around us. We're the owners and masters of our lives, right? No, we're not. You didn't even get to pick your own name. You didn't even get to pick your parents, did you? Before you were born, the Lord didn't come up to you with a stack of papers and